In my hand, I have a video game controller for a Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch is Nintendo's latest video game console. How many of you remember the original Nintendo Entertainment System that came out in the 80s? Okay, maybe you played it, maybe you got one for your kids or your grandkids. I have fond memories. Yep, right over there. I have fond memories of playing Super Mario Brothers, defeating Bowser, saving the princess, all in a good day's work. Well, video games have changed a lot since then. Controllers have changed a lot, but they still basically work in similar fashion. So, for example, this controller works just like you think it would. You could move the joystick forward, and your character would move forward. You can move the joystick back. Your character would move back. You can move it to the left and to the right, and your character would move accordingly. And you could even press the A button, and your character would jump, okay, probably a little higher and a little more graciously than I just did just then. But this controller, it has a very clean look, very sleek, very colorful, and it looks really good on the outside. But inside, there is a problem, okay? And the problem inside the controller is something called drift or lag, okay? And so what that means is I could set the controller down and not touch it whatsoever, and there would be a slight drift in the joystick to make your character spin in circles, right? And so you can see that if you're playing a game and your character is doing this, that's a problem, right? Okay? Need to kind of reorient myself here for a sec. So that's a problem, right? That's a problem if you're trying to play the game. It's a problem if you're trying to focus on one thing. And it's funny because it's there's something broken here, but it's not in a way that we can really see. Okay? Right? Because there's things that we can't always see. We live. There, people are often the same way too, aren't they? Like there's things inside that we don't always see. There's things on the outside we can see. Okay, when it comes to people, right? We can see if a person is cut deeply. We see scars. If a person trips and face plants onto the ground, we see bruising around the face. Even if you have a broken bone, we may very well see a cast. Okay, on the outside, we can see those things, but it's the brokenness on the inside that we don't always see, and it's the brokenness on the inside that we don't always know how to treat. Okay, so while we're all broken on some level, we're all broken in very different ways. Okay, so I want you to imagine for a minute. I want you to imagine you're going to a restaurant and you're sitting down to eat some of your favorite breakfast foods. Okay, I don't know how many of you go out for breakfast, but you're sitting down to eat your favorite breakfast foods, and the waiter is coming, right? He's got your tray of food. On that tray, he's got a plate of bacon and eggs. He's got biscuits and gravy on that plate. There's a side of grits. There's a cup of coffee, a hot cup of coffee. There's a tall glass of orange juice. There's a short stack of pancakes with syrup just oozing over the sides. There's like a little syrup puddle around the pancakes. There's so much, okay? And this is an imaginary meal, so it's 0 calories, so you can go with me on this. And so you are licking your lips. That food is making its way to your table. Then all of a sudden you see it happen. You see the waiter trip over his own feet, and we see that tray fly through the air, and everything's in slow motion, and you say, "No!" And everything goes everywhere. The plates break. Eggs fly everywhere. The grits is into the carpet. The pancakes are broken into pieces. Syrup is getting soaked up in the carpet. Your coffee cup breaks. Your OJ is everywhere. And so everything is broken, but in different ways. Nothing breaks the same. Nothing breaks the same. And it's true for the tray of food, and it's true for you and I, that we are all broken, but we're broken in very different ways. And it's not always in ways that we can see. Okay, we live among people who are broken both internally and externally. Okay, if you missed last week, we are in the middle of a series called Check the Box. And last week we had a conversation about the voices that influence us. There are voices that we listen to that are for our good, and then there are voices that we think are for our good, but ultimately lead us into bad decisions. Voices that lead us in the wrong direction, and in the end lead to our demise. And Pastor Matt talked about the serpent challenging our identity. And if you don't know who you are, someone will tell you. And the enemy is great at contrasting and putting thoughts in our heads that contrast who God and what His Word says we are. Okay? And ultimately, those thoughts can lead to our downfall. This is something that Jesus affirms in John chapter 10, verse 10, where He says this. He says, "It's the thief that comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." The topic that we are covering this morning is not a popular one, but unfortunately it's very necessary for us to speak on this. It's something that has affected so many of us in different ways, and it's the topic of suicide. And what better way for the enemy to destroy us than to actually destroy us, okay? To begin to plant ideas in our minds for us to take our own life, to literally destroy ourselves, affecting us, affecting our families, affecting our friends, affecting everything around us, okay? In addition to His plan for our life, His purpose, and totally cutting that short, totally undercutting what His design was for us. Okay? And it's safe to say many of us in this room have had people very, very close to us take their own lives. Maybe for you, it was a brother. Maybe a sister. Maybe for you, it was a close friend, a spouse, a child, maybe even a parent. Okay, in fact, according to Suicide Awareness Voices of Education, research says that 1 of every 2 people have been affected in some way by suicide. Right? And I think the other 50%, maybe they just haven't been alive long enough, because at some point it's going to affect us. Okay, so 1 in every 2 people have been affected. More than almost 45,000 Americans take their lives each year. That is 123 per day. So in 1 year, we're talking half the population of Elmore County. Okay, that is a large number. Right? 1 in every 6 teenagers have considered suicide in the last 12 months. So what that means is when our teenagers gather here on Sunday night, when they gather here on Wednesday nights, according to our numbers, we're looking at about 7 to 8 of those have considered suicide in the last 12 months. Okay? They've thought about it within the last year. Okay? 1 in every 17 adults consider suicide as an option, and 1 in every 4 persons has experienced suicidal thinking at some point in their lives, but has likely never talked about it due to shame or embarrassment. And I believe the enemy has a way of shaming us. The enemy has a way of embarrassing us and keeping us quiet about this. If we are suffering from depression, if we are navigating life through mental illness, if we have considered suicide, the enemy has a way of making us feel guilt about that. The enemy has a way of making us feel shame about that. And the enemy would like nothing more for us to be quiet about it, for us to shut up, for us to be silent, and just totally isolate us from the help that we could get. Okay? And so Henry David Thoreau said this. He said, "The great mass of men, and women for that matter, lead lives of quiet desperation." The great mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And so many are quiet about this topic. So many of us are quiet because there is sort of this stigma attached to it, that we don't want to talk about it. We don't necessarily want to get into something like that. People may think that we're weird. People may think that we're crazy. People may be unsure of us. People may not trust us if we disclose too much about our inner workings and our inner thoughts. People tend to want to make everything look like it's okay. Like, I'm okay. We put up this image and this front that everything is fine and everything is okay. And my hope for us this morning as a church is that we can start that conversation today. Okay, if you are considering suicide, if you are battling depression, battling mental illness, is that we can start the conversation today, and that Mulder Church can be a place, that Mulder Church can be a gateway to your healing if you are considering those things. I believe that it's the church's job to get loud about this topic, okay? To get loud about this topic and to give you what you need. I believe the church needs to provide hope and create a pathway, okay? To create a pathway for you to Jesus if you are a person who is battling something like that. And so our goal this morning, okay, we want to remove that stigma. Our goal this morning is that if you are considering any of those things, if you are battling one of those things, my prayer for us is that you would move, okay, or that we would help others move, okay, from a place of quiet desperation, that we would move from a place of quiet desperation into an honest conversation about suicide, and even beyond that, okay, that we would see the God that knows us, loves us, and is with us in those dark places. Okay? So we're moving from desperation, okay, to an honest conversation, knowing who God is, knowing that God is in the darkness with us. All right? So, desperation has many faces. Desperation has many faces. Okay? Who is this? Somebody tell me. George Bailey. Okay? How many of you have ever seen It's a Wonderful Life? Okay? Great movie. Great movie. My wife and I try to watch it once a year. It's a great movie to reorient your life and kind of help you see life a little differently. If you remember George Bailey's story, George was incredibly selfless. Okay? Gave up so much of what he wanted to help his friends, to help the people around him. And when things went south, when he lost a large sum of money that he needed, that I believe it was old Mr. Potter took it from him, okay? Old man Potter. George is on the bridge, ready to take his life, and he utters the words, "I said I wish I'd never been born," right? He was ready to end it all right there. This is a face of desperation. Okay, this is the face of a desperate man. So desperation can look like this, but desperation can also look like this. Okay, famous faces. Faces, seemingly happy faces. Have so much going for them, but on the inside, there's brokenness. On the inside, there is depression. So faces of desperation can look like this, but most often, they look like this. They look like normal people. They look like you. They look like me. They have full-time jobs. They have kids to raise. They have taxes to pay. They mow their yards. They work among us. They feel the weight of life that you feel. They feel the pressures in life that you feel. And so part of us getting loud about suicide among God's people, part of us having a conversation about it is moving to a place where we begin to normalize it, where we begin to understand that it's something that is happening around us. It's not just something that somebody somewhere else is dealing with depression. Somebody somewhere else is dealing with suicidal thinking, but it is in our midst. Okay? It's the people we share meals with. It's the people that we go to school with. It's the people that we work alongside. It's the people in our midst, in our lives. And so it's important that God help us have eyes to see that. Okay? That we would open our eyes and to see that this is happening around us. Okay? And so one myth that exists about suicide and that exists about the Bible is that the Bible doesn't really have much to say about suicide. Okay, it doesn't use the word suicide in it, and so what is that going to be very helpful to us? And the people often see the Bible as very irrelevant, sort of out of touch. But the truth is that the Bible has several different instances of suicide and different motivations for suicide. It even has suicide prevention conversations and a lot of suicidal thinking. And so what we're going to do real fast is we're going to walk through a couple of those and talk about it. But real quick, how many of you, when you think about suicide in the Bible, who's the first person that comes to mind? Judas. Yeah, Judas is typically the first one that we think about because he's sort of directly connected to Jesus in this way. But Judas betrays Jesus for a sum of money, has shame, has regret about what he did, and unable to forgive himself, Judas hangs himself. So Judas's suicide was one motivated by the shame that he could not shake. Okay, so we think of Judas. Another one that we think of, and we probably never thought about it this way, but by definition it is Samson. Okay, when Samson is blinded, put against the pillars, he uses his strength to collapse the ceiling and to kill himself and all the Philistines in the room. And we tend to think, well, he did that sort of like for the glory of God. But if you actually read the book of Judges, it says that Samson, did that, broke the pillars to avenge what the Philistines did to his eyes. So his suicide was one motivated by revenge. All right, another one, King Saul. King Saul is wounded in battle, and in an attempt to control his own ending, perhaps in fear of what the enemy might do to him, maybe he would be tortured, maybe he would be spared, maybe he would suffer even more. His suicide was motivated by control. I'm going to control how I go out. I'm going to control my ending in this, right? Okay. And one person, another one that maybe you've not heard much about this guy, but a guy by the name of Ahithophel. Ahithophel was a counselor to King David. And when an uprising came against David's throne, a rebellion of sorts, Ahithophel chose the other side that David was not a part of. And he was a counselor for the side of the opposition. And once the rebellion began to break down, Ahithophel went home and took his own life, unsure of what David might do now that he's back in charge, now that the uprising has been squashed. So we could say his suicide was motivated by his broken career, his loss of influence, and potentially by lack of control. Probably a couple different things in the case of Ahithophel. But what we see here in the scriptures are several instances of suicides, all motivated by different things. All motivated by different things. And we also hear desperate voices of people that we hold in high regard. Okay, people who have written books of the Bible, people that we look to as examples. We hear voices of desperation. Okay, and so we hear it with Job. Right, in the book of Job, if you've read the book of Job, you see Job say this a lot. He says things like this a lot. In chapter 3, he says, "Why did I not perish at birth, okay, and die as I came from the womb?" Right? Why didn't that just happen? Why couldn't that happen? Right? In Job again, chapter 10, "Why then did you bring me from the womb? Oh, that I had died and that no eye had seen me." Right? So we see Job just lamenting. It's like, why didn't I just die at birth? Okay, why are we doing all this? Okay, King David often laments his feeling of abandonment. David often laments of feeling apart from God, feeling distant from God. Okay, we see that in the Psalms. David says, "My tears have been my food day and night, while they say continually, 'Where is your God?'" Okay, Psalm 13. "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day?" And so we hear this language from King David, someone that we hold in high regard, someone that we have great respect for. Even Elijah, the prophet Elijah, when you open up 1 Kings 18, Elijah has this great encounter with the prophets of Baal, where on Mount Carmel, God has this great demonstration of power, showing himself to be the one true God. Elijah is proven to be right. And shortly after this, Elijah is exhausted. Elijah is on the run. Elijah is on the run for his life from Queen Jezebel. And the scriptures say this. It says, "He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, 'It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life.'" God, I've had enough. I'm done. Can you just send that chariot now? Like, let's get out of here, right? Okay, Prophet Jeremiah says this. He says, "Cursed be the day on which I was born. The day when my mother bore me, let it not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father, a son is born to you." Okay, so not only cursed is the day I was born, but the guy that told my dad, cursed that guy too. To which if I'm that guy, it's like, whoa, hey, leave me out of this, okay? Like you've got your stuff going on, but I don't want any part of this, all right? You keep to yourself. And so we see the prophet Jeremiah lamenting, saying the same thing. I wish I hadn't been born, okay? Wish I were dead. Okay, even Jonah. Hey, Jonah, "Oh, now, O Lord, take away my life. It is better for me to die than to live." Okay, and haven't we had thoughts like this before? Have we not? I think it's so good for us to open up the scriptures and see that many people used by God, okay, many people who are we could say are heroes of the faith in ministry, names that we know, they question whether they wanted to continue living. Okay? They question whether or not it's worth it. Okay, they question, God, are we done yet? Like, I don't want to do this anymore. Okay, they question whether or not they should continue to live. And if they did, I'm sure we have too. Okay, if they've questioned life, if they've questioned whether when they wanted to continue living, I'm sure we have as well. Okay, I'm willing to bet that many of us have had that very thought at one point or another. Okay, not only would it be great if I were dead, those around me would be better off too. I would no longer be a burden to them. I would no longer weigh them down. I would no longer affect them negatively so much the way that I am. Okay, and just like in the scriptures, we all have different motivations. Okay, if it's something you've considered, you've probably been motivated in a different way. Maybe there's a moment in your life where a relationship that you were just so close, a relationship came to an end, and because that relationship ended, it feels like a part of you died. And so you begin to settle into this hopelessness that you can't shake. Okay, maybe you are in a depression and you've been carrying it for years because anytime it's begin to rise up, you just kind of press it down, press it down, press it down. Don't want to talk about it. Don't want to bring it up. Have a certain level of shame about it. Maybe a loved one has passed away, and that has created a sense of depression, a sense of despair in you. Maybe a broken career. Hey, everything with your job was going great, and then something in the economy just changes and gets turned upside down, and now you're looking for a fresh start that you really don't want to start at all. Okay, you didn't want to make that change. Or maybe you're wrestling with an addiction. You have an addiction, and you would be mortified if someone found out about that. Okay, and there's nothing that you can do to stop, and so you've considered taking your own life. Right? So there's reasons all over the room. Okay, there's different motivations all over the room. Maybe it's the weight of debt, right? I mean, living in a consumeristic culture, so many of us accrue debt, and it feels like, gosh, we'll never pay this off. And we even think, well, my life insurance policy is pretty good. Maybe my family would be better off without me. Okay, so debt's often a motivation as well, and just some of us are under the weight of depression, and we don't want to deal with it anymore. Some of us are trying to navigate with life with a loved one who's battling mental illness and trying to just sort that out and figure that out. But we all have reasons, and the scriptures teach us that people consider suicide for different reasons. And it's different reasons people consider taking their life. And what's worth saying, though, in the case of David, in the case of Jeremiah, in the case of Elijah, and all the ones that we mentioned, what we see them do is at some point they begin to lift their eyes and see who God is. Okay? They begin to be reminded about who God is and what God has done. And in some instances, God actually comes in to intervene. Right? In the case of Elijah, an angel actually comes to him and says, hey, you're depressed, you need to eat, you need to sleep, and you'll be okay. Right? And so it's in this community that we have with God. Okay? This community with God that is available to us. It's in this community and with the community with each other that God begins to pull us out of the pit of despair. Okay? Begins to pull us out of that darkness. And what God does is He shows us that He's been there all along. That in the darkness, in the despair, God is with us, right? And so there's this beautiful story in the New Testament in Acts 16 where we see this happening. In Acts 16, we see Paul and Silas. Paul and Silas have just cast a demon out of a slave girl. And this slave girl was able to fortune tell, okay? She was a fortune teller, and that made her owners a lot of money, okay? So now that the demon is out, the girl can't make the money that she was, okay? And so the owners of the slave girl are now mad at Paul and Silas. They have them drugged off to the officials. Paul and Silas are whipped, are beaten, and thrown into prison, okay? So we pick up the story in verse 25. And so Paul and Silas in prison, freshly beaten, okay? Probably a little tender, a little soft. This is what happens. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Okay, did I mention they were just beaten? Okay, so at midnight, They are singing. They are praising the Lord, okay? I can't promise you that if that happened to me, I would be singing, Lord, I lift your name on high at midnight in the prison, okay? That's just me. And the prisoners were listening to them, and suddenly there was a great earthquake so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's bonds were unfastened. When the jailer awoke and saw that the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried with a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." And the jailer called for lights and rushed in. And trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their wounds, and he was baptized at once, he and all of his family. And so we see this account of the jailer. We don't know much about the jailer going into the story. We learn later that he has a family of his own, but the jailer, he's just a guy, okay, with a job, just trying to do his job, doing the job he gets paid to do. And then all of a sudden, an earthquake hits and something completely out of his control happens. Right? The earthquake isn't his fault. He's just doing his job. Something out of control happens, and he begins to panic. Okay? He begins to quickly sink into despair because historically, jailers are accountable for their prisoners. Okay? Anything that might happen to their prisoners, their well-being if they escape, it's often a thing where because they are responsible, they may very well receive the punishment that the prisoners were receiving. So it's likely that the jailer could have been beaten. It's likely that the jailer, depending how many people could have escaped, it's likely the jailer could have been executed. Okay, and so there's no telling what could happen to his family and them being provided for. And so in this moment of panic, the jailer freaks out, okay, draws his sword, and in this moment of panic, in his moment of despair, in the dark, a voice that he cannot see, okay, a voice from the darkness calls out and says, "Stop. Do not harm yourself. You are not alone. You are not alone." And so I read this story. I've read this story several times. And if I were Paul and I'm thinking about my escape, I'd probably let the jailer kill himself. Like, is that too honest for church? Has anybody else thought about that? Like, if we're thinking, this is my ticket out of here, like, don't say a word. But obviously Paul loves Jesus more than I do. And, our pastors, they probably would not do that. They'd probably say, no, let's save him. We'll get out of here. But I'm in need of more sanctification. I'm in need of more Jesus. That's just where I am, okay? But yeah, I'm thinking this is my ticket out here. But what we see here in the scriptures is that it's this voice of godly, loving community that leads the jailer from a place of desperation to a safe place. Okay, and not just a safe place, but more specifically, that safe place being known as a child of God and being saved by the grace of Jesus Christ. Okay, because this intervention that takes place not only affects the jailer, but it has eternal effects for his entire family. His entire family now has created a legacy of faith, okay, that would not have happened had he run himself through, had he had killed himself. Okay, and so where God had a bigger plan, the jailer could not see that. In a moment of panic, the jailer could not see that. And what we see God doing is what he always does. God is reaching into those dark places where we are, where we feel depressed, where we feel alone, where we feel isolated. We see God reaching into those places, saying to us, "You are not alone. I am with you. Do not harm yourself." And so this is our goal. This is our call. We see God's call on our life. We see the call that was given to Isaiah. We see the call that Jesus accepted in Isaiah 61 that says this. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. And so here's my challenge for us this morning as I wrap up. If you found yourself in a place where you've considered suicide, I want you to talk to someone about it. Okay, maybe it happened 20 years ago, and it was a span of time that was like for 20 seconds you thought about it, and you hadn't thought about it since. Okay, maybe that's your case. Maybe it's something that you thought of yesterday. But I want to encourage you to talk to someone about it. And if it happened so long ago, you might think, is it really necessary? Like, is that going to do anyone any good? What it does do is it begins to break apart that stigma that is attached to it. Okay? And it brings what is in the dark out into the light of a loving, godly community. And you don't have to tell a big group of people. Maybe you can just tell one person. And maybe telling one person, saying, hey, I thought about this 5 years ago, hadn't thought about it since, but it feels good to talk about it. It feels good to again break apart that stigma, break apart that shame that the enemy wants to keep us from talking about it. The enemy wants us to keep it bottled up so that he can isolate those that are battling it. Okay, and maybe you're sitting in here today, and it's not a 20 years ago thing. It's not a 5 year ago thing, but it is an everyday thing for you. It's something that you've thought of every single day. I want to encourage you to reach out to someone. Okay? Reach out to someone, talk to someone about this. Okay? Because studies show that 80 to 90% of those who are battling depression, those that seek treatment for depression, whether that's through medicine or through therapy, have success. 80 to 90% of people have success. And if you think, Justin, I don't really know who I would talk to about this. I don't really trust anybody. I don't really know anybody. You can talk to me about it because I've thought about it before. Right? If we're being totally transparent, I've thought about it before. So doesn't that put us in the same boat a little bit? Okay, so talk to me. Talk to Matt. Talk to Brad. Talk to Mara. Talk to anyone on our leadership team. You don't have to have it all together for us, because we'll tell you we sure don't. We don't have it all together. We're just trying to love Jesus and love people. Okay, remember what Jesus said. He said it's the sick that need healing. It's the sick that need a doctor, not those who are well. And so, last thing. Maybe what I just said, you're thinking, Justin, I've never really thought about it. Like, that's not really anything that's on my radar to really talk about or consider. I bet you know people who have thought about it. I bet you know people who are around you, who are in your family, who are your coworkers, people you have lunch with, people that you know who are walking through something right now that are in need of some help, that are in need of a voice to talk to. Would you be a lifeline for them? Would you reach out to them? Would you be that godly voice in the darkness that says, hey, you're not alone. I'm here for you. But having that conversation's hard, isn't it? Like, how do you do that? How do you begin to have that conversation? It's like, so Frank, did you see the Alabama game yesterday? Yeah, me too. So listen, you ever think about killing yourself? Like, can we agree that that's kind of an odd conversation to have and kind of uncomfortable? Like, so how do we do that? I mean, we as a culture don't like to talk about weighty things like that. Okay, and so rather maybe it's helpful for this approach. Hey, Frank, I know that you kind of been going through some things, and I've noticed that you're under a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of things going on in your life right now. Are you doing okay? Do you need someone to talk to? Because I've heard that people going through what you're going through have sometimes consider suicide. Is that something that you've ever considered? Right? And maybe they could be offended, but I bet you that if you are doing it in love, okay, I bet you if you are doing it with a genuine concern for them, okay, they will hear that and they will understand. And so I want to encourage you to listen. I want you to take the risk. Okay, take the risk of being a lifeline to that person, because like the jailer and like Paul, you can make an eternal difference. You can make an eternal difference in their life. Okay? You are a child of God. Every one of you. You're a child of God and you're not alone. Okay? Know that. Remind people of that. Okay? Be that voice in the darkness. Okay? May you be a gateway for them to find healing and community in Christ.